Morgan Freeman had always loved visiting old libraries. The dust-covered books lining the shelves made the lost stories within them feel even more valuable. That day, while flipping through the fragile pages of an old book in a research library, something caught his attention. A faded, yellowed envelope, carefully tucked between the pages. On the envelope, written in faint, unsteady handwriting, was a single sentence: "To my father, if I make it home." Morgan hesitated for a moment. Those words carried weight. Carefully, he opened the envelope, unfolding a letter written in shaky, fading ink. "Father, if you're reading this, it means I made it home. But even if I don't, please know that I never forgot you. Don't remember me as a soldier, but as your little boy. If I return, please hold me. If I don't forget me." Morgan took a deep breath. This was a farewell letter, one written by a soldier staring death in the face. But the most heartbreaking part, the letter had never been opened. Had this man never made it back, or had he returned to find no one waiting for him? Morgan knew he had to find out. With the letter in hand, Morgan went to an archive center specializing in military records. After speaking with the staff, he discovered the soldier's name: Michael R. Thompson. Michael had been sent to fight in the Vietnam War over 40 years ago. Official records showed that he had never been listed as dead or missing, but after the war, he had simply disappeared, as if he had never existed. The deeper Morgan dug, the more tragic the story became. Michael had returned home after the war, but there had been no one left to welcome him. His family had assumed he was dead. His childhood home had been sold. His father, believing he had lost his son forever, had passed away shortly after. Michael was alone. Now he lived in a nursing home, an old soldier, forgotten by time, without family or friends. Morgan stared at the letter in his hand, his fingers tightening around it. He whispered under his breath, "If no one remembers you, then I will." And with that, he made his decision. He would find this man. He would place this letter in his hands. But what he didn't know was whether this would be a long overdue reunion or a final goodbye. When Morgan arrived at the nursing home for aging veterans, the halls were filled with an eerie silence. These were men who had returned from war, but had never truly come back. They had endured the harshest years of their lives, only to be forgotten by the very people who were supposed to honor them. Morgan let out a deep sigh and turned to the nurse beside him. The man spoke in a hushed voice. "Michael hasn't spoken to anyone in years. His life fell apart after the war. He shut himself off from the world." Morgan walked slowly toward the door. Inside, an old man sat in a chair by the window. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. His eyes were empty. His face bore deep lines, not from time, but from the weight of memories. Solitude clung to him like an old worn-out coat. Morgan quietly took a seat beside him. The man didn't turn, but he acknowledged the presence beside him with a heavy sigh. "People only come when they want something," he muttered, his voice weary, defeated. Morgan gave a faint smile. "I didn't come to take anything. I came to bring something." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the yellowed envelope, and placed it on the table. The moment Michael's eyes landed on it, he froze. His trembling hands reached out as if touching something from another life. As soon as he saw the handwriting, his lips quivered. His eyes widened in disbelief. "I wrote this for my father." He unfolded the letter, his gaze following the words he had written decades ago. As he read, his face changed. His mind drifted back into the past, pulling up memories long buried in the corners of his mind. The words hung in the air. Then, he reached the final lines and whispered them aloud. "If I make it back, hold me. If I don't forget me." Michael's hands shook. His breathing grew uneven. A long-forgotten emotion spread across his face. He clenched his jaw, shut his eyes tightly, and took a deep breath. But the weight inside his chest wouldn't let go. His shoulders slumped. For years, he had locked away this pain. And now, after 40 years, he finally cried. The silence stretched between them. He gripped the letter, his fingers pressing into the paper. Morgan watched him carefully, seeing a lifetime of wounds that had never healed. War wasn't just war, Michael finally murmured, his voice hollow. It wasn't just fighting the enemy. The real battle began when we came home. Morgan said nothing. He let him speak. We left for Vietnam as heroes, but when we returned, no one wanted us. People turned their faces away. They called us murderers. They called us killers. It wasn't like those stories we grew up watching, where the soldiers come home to cheering crowds. No one was waiting at the door. Morgan felt the weight of his words. He looked at Michael and saw the life that had been stolen from him. Even in the middle of war, I survived by believing I would come home one day. Michael continued, his voice unsteady. But when I got back, there was no home left for me. My father was gone. Our house was sold. My friends barely recognized me. He took a slow, shuddering breath, his eyes staring at the ceiling, as if searching for something long lost. I should have died back there, but I didn't. And every day I lived, another part of me didn't. The room filled with silence, the gunfire, the explosions, the screams. They had stopped long ago. But for Michael, the war had never ended. No one ever said thank you. No one ever said, I'm glad you made it back. The only thing that greeted me was silence. Morgan could feel his pain. The burden Michael had carried for decades now sat between them like a ghost, lingering in the air. Michael lowered his head. I never died, but I never really lived either. Morgan took a deep breath and turned to him. Michael, what do you want to do now? The old man sat still for a long time, his hands clenched, his breath shaky. Finally, he lifted his gaze. For the first time, there was a small flicker of light in his eyes. I want to go see my father, to finish what was left unfinished. Morgan gave him a reassuring smile. Then let's begin. And at that moment, after 40 long years, Michael took his first step out of the shadows of the past. Morgan watched as Michael slowly shook his head. My father, he never got to read this. A heavy silence filled the room. Morgan could see it in his eyes. The greatest pain Michael carried wasn't the horrors of war, but the fact that he never got to say goodbye. Maybe he forgave you, Morgan said gently. Michael lifted his gaze, his eyes glistening with unspoken grief. For him to forgive me, I would have had to actually live. Morgan nodded in quiet understanding. Because Michael didn't just mean survival. He had come back, but he had never truly returned. The war hadn't killed him, but it had taken his life nonetheless. Morgan leaned in slightly, his voice softer. So what do you want to do now? Michael remained silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he tried to smile. I want to go somewhere, but first, I need to visit my father. The next day, Morgan and Michael walked through an old cemetery, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. They moved in silence until they reached a single gravestone. Michael's father's name etched into the worn surface. Michael knelt down, his frail hands tracing the letters, his touch lingering, as if trying to bridge the decades of absence. I made it home, Dad, just not the way you hoped. His voice was barely above a whisper. Morgan stood beside him, offering quiet support. After a long pause, Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out the letter, and gently placed it on the grave. I'm late, but I'm here. A deep breath, a moment of stillness. Then, as they walked away, Michael murmured, I've lived too long in the past. Maybe it's time to start looking forward. Morgan nodded, a faint smile on his lips. To live, we have to look ahead. And that day, for the first time, Michael took his first real step forward.